And we are live. Welcome everybody to today's meetup. I already see the first people joining. Good to have you here. If you already joined, take your time. Maybe locate the chat functionality. Use the time to say hi in the chat. If you do that, please make sure to select to all attendees before saying hi, because otherwise only Cristóbal and myself can read that. Maybe include the location where you're from. It's always interesting to see from where people join. Jonas, you were first. Nice. Hi. Copenhagen. Great. Welcome. Helsingborg. Very Nordic. No, Barcelona. Yes, Anna, that's you, Chris. Okay. Felix, hi. From Berlin. Nice. We give this 1 or 2 more minutes to allow people to join. Maybe I can already go over some of the housekeeping rules before getting started while you all figured out the chat functionality. Really nice. Go ahead using it. So this meeting is being recorded and we'll share the recording tomorrow with you together with some useful links in an email. If you have questions during our discussion, I would say, feel free to drop them either in the chat, I'll monitor that, or maybe even better, put them in the Q&A section. There's also a Q&A section. If you put them there, they don't get lost that easily. So that's also a great place to put questions. The more questions, the better, I'd say. We had, in some of the latest webinars that we are running, we had a really nice discussion going on in the chat and also in the Q&A. Let's see whether we can continue with that tonight or today, depending on from where you join. Mohammed, for example, joined from Dubai. Probably different time of the day there than it is here. Russia, Moscow. Hi, Igor. I think, Igor, you selected to host and panelists only, and also you, Mohammed. So maybe you want to reshare your hi and select all attendees, because otherwise not everybody can read your messages. Cool. I just give this 1 more minute and then we get started. Kirill, hi. Where are you today, Cristóbal? I mean, I'm in Hamburg, so Germany. Where are you guys?
I'm in Barcelona today, so enjoying the weather so far.
Nice.
Yeah, me too. Also based in, well, I was going to say based in our office in Barcelona. Of course, Thoughtworks, like many other companies, not everyone heads into the office all the time anymore, but I'm actually coincidentally physically located quite near the office on one of the seaside suburbs of Barcelona.
Cool. Nice. All right, I'd say let's get that started. Maybe to repeat the housekeeping. So this meetup is being recorded. I assume some people will join always a few minutes later. So I might also write this in the chat again. If you have questions during our discussion, place them either in the chat or in the Q&A section. And I think with that, we're ready to start. I'm really excited to host this webinar. We are hosting a couple of webinars. Maybe I introduce myself first. I'm Christoph, currently working for Humanitech. And at Humanitech, we help a lot of teams to build their internal platforms. But that's not the topic of today's meetup. Today, we are going to talk about an article, I think, that the two of you wrote. It's a bit funny because this is the 3 Chris webinar or meetup. So let's see whether we create some confusion with that. But anyways, yeah, you wrote this article, Mind the Execution Gap, which I really liked. And we had a short discussion last week where you told me that one of you has a more optimistic view on platforms and one has a more, I don't want to say pessimistic, but skeptical view on it. You didn't tell me who is who, so let's see whether we can figure that out today. I'm pretty sure we can. But why don't we start with the two of you introducing yourselves and maybe already answer the question, why did you write this article? Because if you go out there there's probably millions of articles on platforms and internet platforms. Why did you write the 1 million and first article on this?
Sure. Well, I'll start, and I'll try to claim Chris without qualifier, if I can occupy that part of the namespace. So I'm the head of technology for Thoughtworks Spain, and I've worked for Thoughtworks for more than 10 years now in many different countries. And so part of the privilege, but also the heartbreak of a consultant is entering many different situations, seeing how things go, trying to support it, and then moving on and doing something else. And one of the things that I noticed over my career that made me enthusiastic about the concept of platforms is places where people seem to spend most of their time kind of solving the same problems over and over, or it'd be solved for one team and then another team would have to solve it again. And it seems like somehow this noble spirit of developer and team freedom, which I definitely believe in and endorse, was somehow leading to a situation where people were doing busy work or non-value add work or not really connecting with the problems because everyone was doing the same thing over and over again. And so I guess my original interest in the platform topic kind of came as a way of somehow avoiding that waste of human time and potential, was how I originally got to that point. And eventually that led to me and Cristóbal having many conversations about exactly how one should approach this to get the promised benefit. And that's where our article came in. Who are you, Cristóbal?
Well, I'm Cristóbal. I'm a principal consultant in Thoughtworks Spain. Basically, that means that I am a little bit far away from the code. I was talking to Christoph. I'm really coding in PowerPoint and Excel these days, which is a little bit boring. But well, and I've been many years working in operation teams, in infrastructure operations teams, and in software development alike, right? So I have a little bit of both visions: the vision of product, and the product operation as well. And yeah, it was an interesting journey discussing with Chris about the benefits from the platform and the risks associated to them, both technical and non-technical, right? Because many of the risks are not necessarily technical, are operational or organizational or product. And that was super interesting. It was super interesting to share with him my opinion on that. And we were, I think that we got pretty good understanding on each other point of view, which was really cool.
Because I think the actual specific genesis of the article was, I might have been extolling how platforms address all these problems and, fix these problems. And one of the things that when we got talking, we recalled was, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Martin Fowler wrote an article like 7 or 8 years ago called "You Must Be This High to Use Microservices." And
Yes.
it kind of follows a similar principle, right? So, okay, I do, maybe you might expect it as a consultant from Thoughtworks, have some enthusiasm for the benefits of microservices, but I also acknowledge that the adoption of microservices, certainly at one point, its most intense pitch, was driven at least partially by fashion. And that was something that Martin Fowler noticed as well. And so his response was to say, well, it's a trade-off. It's a different point in the design space that can get you benefits. That doesn't mean it's a silver bullet. Famously, there are no silver bullets in software. So his response was to say, well, if you're going to do this microservice thing, there's a bunch of other stuff you have to get right if you want to reasonably expect it not to blow up in your face. So, if you can't, as an organization, invest in observability or, deployment, the fact that you've broken things up into many, many small pieces is going to hurt you, not help you. And when Cristóbal and I got to thinking about platforms, we felt there was a similar phenomenon going where it's true that platforms, well, I think, have enormous potential to support different bits of values in organizations, but that doesn't mean that you can get those benefits for free and without solving the technical and non-technical questions that Cristóbal mentioned just before.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? Just doesn't exist. Maybe, you structured your article, I think, in 5 broader topics, which is business value, product thinking, operational excellence, software engineering excellence, and healthy teams, right? And maybe we use this structure to make sure we cover all these points. I found it interesting that you started with business value. Because I've seen a couple of platform teams that start more on the solving an engineering problem side than solving or creating business value. What's important there for you? Why starting with that topic?
Well, you said why starting with this topic, and the word why is the key point for me there. So I do think that there can be a bit of an Ozymandias scenario where people build a platform because they're thinking about it as a technical monument to their brilliance, right? And this is kind of the kind of abstraction that developers have fallen in love with over in many years. So, they might have tried to build frameworks, or if you go back far enough, they built their own programming language because they thought that if they could just build the perfect piece of infrastructure, then when they came to actually pay attention to the real problem, everything would just fall into place, right? So I think that starting with a purpose is really kind of important. So if you don't know why you're committing to a platform, and I use the verb committing consciously because I think building a platform has a little bit of a fallacy in it, because it implies that the original construction dominates the effort, which is not true. If you're committing to a platform, so you're going to build it, you're going to maintain it, you're going to improve it, you're going to be there in a couple of years' time when there's a problem with it, and you've convinced your company to bet their future on it. If you're going to do that, you should have an argument in mind as to why the benefits outweigh the costs. There's going to be a lot of human effort and late nights and backlogs and YAML going into concocting a platform, probably, depending on how thick or thin you go into it. And I think it's part of our responsibility as professional engineers that we should be able to say, we are going to cost this in order to deliver this benefit. So the benefit might be our product teams are spending too much time reinventing the wheel, so we want them to be able to focus on delighting the customer. So we should say we should have a platform to reduce some of that repetition. In that case, we've created a means by which we can judge our success. We can't just say we're successful because we used to have 0 platforms and now we have 1 platform, so tick. We have to say, okay, before we had teams who were reinventing some pretty basic stuff or reintegrating with our own internal authentication services or something like that over and over again, and now they're not. And so by starting with a business case, by which I do not mean 100 slide deck slide pack, I just mean a argument that you could reasonably explain to another human being when you're talking about why you're going into this. If you don't have that justification, I find it hard to say that it's responsible to start inviting people to build their stuff on a platform, because maybe if you haven't got a solid foundation, maybe your organization is going to lose interest or defund it, or the people are going to go elsewhere, and it won't, and you'll have created not a benefit to your colleagues, but something that causes a problem for them. So that's why I think, business value, business case justification for what you want to achieve is a prerequisite to succeeding at achieving it.
And something that, if I may, and something that Chris was pointing as well, there is no need for this platform to deliver an immediate value, and this platform is going to last, or this component is going to last for a number of years, right? So you are going to need to engineer it, you are going to need to deliver it, your organization needs to adopt it. And for all this time, you are not bringing in, that's not a very compelling business case, right? You are getting 0 value until this happens. And after that, there was this study, I think it was this chat about an article that the people at CMU were discussing, and by mid-2000s, an average system was lasting for 7 years in a company. This was like 15 years ago, but I don't think the figures have changed too much. It's 7 years. So whenever we said we are going to deploy that, we need to think more or less, this is going to be 5, 6, 7 years, and we will need to maintain it for that amount of time, or have an exit strategy at least to get out of it before.
And what's fascinating about that is the conditions, the technical and business conditions, are not going to be held in place exactly for the life of that platform. This is kind of what makes it, I think, actually kind of cool to think about platforms and so on, because you're making a bit of a business bet over what will happen in the next future. So you have to think, well, Amazon, GCP, Azure, they offer these kind of services, or maybe, you know, Kubernetes out of the box lets me do these things now. I have a requirement or a need that goes beyond what I can get with those industry standard tools. So I'm going to invest in some extra capability or some special source that is about my organization. But I'm also making a prediction or a bet about how the technology landscape will evolve over that time. You know, will Kubernetes stop being fashionable and suddenly there'll be some other technology, or will you know, Azure release a kind of a, you know, Azure version of Fargate that will be so much more convenient than what I've actually provisioned to my own colleagues, that it'll go from being a competitive advantage to a disadvantage relative to the state of the art. So that, I think that kind of future gazing is kind of cool and fun. Also a little bit dangerous, because depending on what happens in the future, the business case or the justification for you having your own internal platform that isn't just stuff that's available on the market can be affected or even sometimes eroded.
Yeah, I think you have to stay flexible in order to adopt these new technologies. Maybe everything is serverless in 10 years. Yeah, you just don't know yet. And I love this maintenance point. I think that's something that's easily overlooked. It's fun to build something like that, and you'll probably be able to gather a team of your best engineers that are interested in solving this problem. But at some point, you'll have to maintain it. Yeah, very different story.
Well, you say best engineers, but I think there's a very famous kind of division of different kinds of engineer called was it pioneers, settlers, and town planners. I think that Simon Wardley came up with this. So we say the best engineers, but it's also the pioneer engineers.
Yeah.
So the people who want to build,
interested in new stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. So the question is, once it exists, once you've created this service that makes it really easy for you to spin up a new microservice that's, you know, built on top of, you know, creates the instances and the storage in the computer, whatever, will the challenge of living with that, making it robust, you know, pushing it back up when it falls over at 3 a.m. due to some unforeseen DNS outage, is that the same set of people who want to do that? Because I'd like to think so, because I'd like to think that people mature and want to live with their successes and their mistakes and the I can't tell yet, it might be both. But I'm not sure that necessarily there is. And I've certainly seen in more than one client situation the problem of kind of engineering talent flight after the cool thing was done. So the building bit was done, and that's the first very small part of the entire life cycle of a platform. And then they went to look for other challenges and build other platforms in other companies. But then it was quite hard for the organization to find the kind of the long-term committed infrastructure platform engineers to keep this thing alive and thriving for the other 6 of the 7 years that Cristóbal mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. I can clearly see that. So that's business value. Understood. Then I think the next thing you mentioned is already product thinking. So you jump right from business value to product. Maybe Cristóbal, why is product thinking important when building a platform? Because in the end, it's an engineering thing, right? Why do you need product?
Well, that's why are we building something? You said, well, we were discussing that before, right? And we were building something because it's useful to someone in the organization. We want, in fact, what the authors of team topologies, right? They define a platform, a tool set, or component that allows our delivery teams to deliver fast, right? So we need to understand their problems. I love this analogy of this monument. It's not a monument to our competence. It's something that is actually useful for them. And it's a complex problem. And how we understand complex problems with what we know, it's the product mentality, which is feedback loops, verified assumptions through usage, database decisions, and this kind of stuff. We are not just building because after that, they will come. And having this data available, having these feedback loops in place requires some organizational decisions, right? First of all, having these points of contact between the teams, the delivery teams, and the engineering teams, and the platform team, then the mentality or the mindset to build incrementally to understand the problem little by little, and also to be sure that for the developers or the engineering teams to use our platform, they probably are going to need something more along the lines of a power grid instead of a new social network with shiny new features every day. They are going to favor stability and reliability over new buttons and features, right? And that's something we have seen. And because of the same reasons that Chris was mentioning before, it's not always easy to get this mindset of we are going to build a power grid and it's going to be super simple to use and super reliable, very clear interface, very conceptual, very easy for the developers to grasp. And then we are going to deliver it in a reliable way, right? And we can talk about reliability later on. That's please.
I think in some sense you could say the product thinking challenge of a platform is greater than if you are building something with buttons that your end customers are clicking on, because the argument you need to make as to why what you were doing was the most important thing you could have been doing that day is a little bit easier if you have a customer who's like, I'll pay you money if this button does this extra thing, right? There's a very clear line to be drawn. When you're saying, if I create this new way of provisioning servers that will make it easier for another team to get their ideas to market so they can put a new button in front of customers that they'll pay money for, it's actually just more complex an argument. It still ultimately has to be grounded in the end users of a company or the customers of a company liking something, assuming that you're in a standard business environment, because if it doesn't, then you haven't really delivered a positive return on what you're doing. But it's just that much more indirect. So what I might say is that as well as kind of what Cristóbal said about empathy with users, it's also just the extrapolation of how value flows is more complicated and less direct and needs a maybe more discerning thinker in a platform environment than it does in an end user scenario. So, you know, I wouldn't want people to think it's a smaller challenge because the value is less obvious. No, because the value is less obvious, it's a greater challenge to keep your eyes on it.
Yeah, I think it's actually a huge challenge because also the pioneers you mentioned earlier, like the engineers that are interested in building this, I'm sure they have an idea on what they want to build, like because they know their problem very well.
Yeah.
So I think you run the danger that they build something that's fancy for them, but then if you look at 98% of the remaining organization, it might not be useful for them. So I think that's super dangerous.
Yeah, I think someone in the chat, Rob, mentioned like adoption is hard, right? So that is part of, so winning customers over. So it doesn't, you know, history is littered with cases where the best technology didn't win, right? So, you know, Betamax or whatever, there's all sorts of examples you can find on, you know, random blog posts. So just saying my platform actually is better than Azure or AWS or GCP doesn't instantly mean that it's going to be adopted by everyone in your company and you're going to get the big bonus and eventually going to succeed the CTO, right? Because actually you still need to do that outreach. You need to, I don't know, communicate the ideas of the platform. You have to maybe compete with the fact that the raw cloud providers offering have marketing budgets that are many orders of magnitude greater than your ability to, you know, to send out emails of the latest feature of the platform to your company. So, you know, you have to have, I think one of the most important skills of a platform team is that human connection and facilitation skills in order to address the adoption challenge Rob is mentioning. And I think in the past, there has been, maybe even Cristóbal's encountered this as an infrastructure engineer, there's been a stereotype that people working in infra can afford to be antisocial and, you know, you create a basement office or whatever. And I think, okay, maybe there is room for some people who are technically brilliant and antisocial within the scope of a platform team. But as a whole, you're not going to get adoption or cooperate well with the rest of the people in your company if you don't have highly emotionally intelligent and people with good communication skills doing that kind of product evangelism within their own company.
We are building for developer experience, right? And development experience, we are going to understand the developer experience by talking to the developers, talking to our customers downstream. And this is super important. In the article, I think we were mentioning the role of the developer's relationship professional that is able to understand that, it's able to convey the needs from one side to the other and ensure that our work is meaningful for them, right?
Yeah.
So that's super important. Yeah.
And that pursuit of meaningfulness might lead you to focus on different features than if you were focusing on, I don't know, runtime features, right? So maybe what you best need to do is to create a command line interface to make it really easy for people to use your internal platform, right? That might be solving the problem of the barrier to adoption of Teams because they're like confused by it, or they want to be able to use it quickly. If you were just focusing on the runtime technical system, you might think that what you need to do is focus on, I don't know, making it cross-region in whatever cloud provider you're using or something like that. So if you're genuinely using product thinking, you're being led by the needs of the beneficiaries of your platform, and that can sometimes lead you in surprising directions, which is all to the good.
Yeah, it's fully in line with what David said in the chat, right? I mean, try to sell benefits, not features. I think that's exactly the spirit you need if you build that. Now, maybe moving from there to your 2 topics of excellence, because I understand you need a business value, you need product thinking with everything that comes with it, and then you have these 2 excellence points: operational excellence and software engineering excellence. What's so important about these 2?
I think I can summarize this in something that happened to me many years ago. Yeah, I'm very sorry, but many years ago. And I was working in a infra engineering team. This is in the old days. There were we were the cloud provider, in fact. And I recall that I was dropped into a team in mid of the fiscal year or the middle of the exercise, and suddenly I realized that one of the systems that was business critical had no capacity, right? And I was talking to the folks and said, okay, now we have no capacity. And I suddenly called one of the people I was reporting to, and he said, well, I need to have these components, they are these part numbers. I would need you to sign a purchase order by this amount of thousands of euros. I would need to have this done ASAP. And the answer was like quite shocking, right? Was, okay, so can you send me a business plan for that? So, and I was thinking, oh, he's not understanding. And no, in fact, it was me who was not understanding, right? So I was not understanding the situation, and there was some expectations on reliability, on capacity, on demand that had not been very well conveyed. Costs and risk have not been very well conveyed, right? And this was an engineering team. And this is something that people building platforms, this is something that can happen to teams building platforms. Right? One day, you jump from one license tier to the next license tier, to one capacity tier to the next capacity tier. You need double of instance because of computing instances because you are successful, and then your costs skyrocket or your service is not performing. And this requires operational excellence. You need to know how to handle this stuff, right? Back in the day we had, or back in the day and nowadays we have these operational frameworks like ITIL and so on that define a service like utility and warranty is super important, right? It's super important because it conveys to our users the risks that they are incurring on by using our platform. And they convey this risk downstream to their customers as well. They say, if my platform is super reliable, I can be super reliable. If my platform is not super reliable, I would need to be less ambitious. And many decisions, product decisions, are based on that, but are also based on the assumption that whenever an incident happens, for instance, we are going to be able to manage it properly, right? Not only to communicate it, but focus on restoring the service, and also after that, to understanding the root causes or the confluent causes we have that generated that incident, and we are going to put some plan to address them, and so on. Same as we said before, demand and capacity, event management, all these processes need to be understood. And this is not something that comes for free normally. It requires experience, requires training, but definitely it's something that needs to be there. These days, since 2010, this has been this has been transition from the old management frameworks to the site reliability engineering corpus of knowledge that addresses that very well. But this is something that needs to be understood internally in a company and in a team as well. And these capabilities need to be in place. What cannot happen is that, as Chris said in the article, right, that you are not delivering your commitments regarding capacity or service or whatever, and you might not even be realizing it unless you know how to manage this kind of stuff.
I think the key observation is that like platform is a multiplier, right? So in the positive case where you're doing something well, you're like, I have done a good job of making sure that there won't be outages of this service. And now everyone in my company, in the happy case, benefits from the improvement I've made. So that replaces the old case where some teams did it well, some teams did it badly, some teams didn't know it was a thing they had to do at all, right? So in the positive case, it's a positive multiplier. But if you screw it up, your mistake becomes the whole company's problem as well. So like the reason I think we wanted to include excellence in the article was just that we didn't want to make people think that platform was purely about hand waving and like Wardley maps where we talk about commodification and slide decks and things like that. As much as the business and intention and design side of things is important, it does in the end come down to building a technical artifact with hard technical skills. And if your team who embarks on creating a platform don't understand the fundamentals of operating a system in production, maybe they don't understand the networking, they don't understand incident response like Cristóbal said, then you actually have the potential to multiply a negative massively across the whole company. And I've definitely, one of the pathologies I've seen with clients as a fairly medium stage startup was they'd embarked on having a platform team, but the people in the platform team didn't really have any skill or insight beyond that of the rest of the team. So there wasn't really a good case to say that the people who were assembled in that team could make decisions that were robust enough for everyone else in the company to live with, especially since once you start building a platform, you've got technical indirection to match the value indirection we talked about earlier. Suddenly you need to make it work for all cases, not just my 3 microservices. And because they didn't have that operational excellence, even though what they were doing did have a good business justification, they kind of caused problems, at least at first, before they thought to hire SRE or operations people to round out the skill set of the team. So I know I love talking about the concepts of platforms and waving my hands, but you need good old-fashioned competence in operations if you're going to be successful, not just a good business case.
And it's again this think an 8-year time frame, think mid long term, because you don't only have to build it, you have to bring it into the organization, and then you actually have to run the stuff. And yeah, if teams rely on you, you're better there to fix problems. Does that also holds true for the software engineering excellence, or is it mostly operational? What's your gut feeling about that? What's your experience?
I don't know. I think that both of them are super important, are the two sides of the same coin, right? So we want to operate the system in production according to our promises. We want to know how to do it, but also when we build it, we can refer, for instance, to Thoughtworks. It's a company that's super aligned with the extreme programming practices, right? And these practices enable us to deliver software quickly and with that matches customer expectations, because we focus a lot on feedback loops, on having short feedback loops, right? Things like trunk-based development, pair programming, test-driven development. The focus is having short feedback loops. This, if I can jump into my personal anecdote book, proves to be very useful as well in infrastructure. It's not that we need to suspend extreme programming or the practices of having short feedback loops when we enter into the platform world, right? I recall again, in another infrastructure team, we're working with data protection software that needed to be installed and operated across all Europe. And I recall that this software has been traditionally installed and maintained manually, and it was quite painful, right? So in one of the releases, we decided all together as a team to automate all of this as much as possible. This is a number of years ago. I'm not going to say how many, just to not embarrass myself with my age. But the investment on that, it was a team decision. The whole team worked on that. Some of us trying to protect the rest of the team so that the rest of the work could be done investigating stuff, trying to do crazy engineering things to install that software that was not designed to be automated, patching servers automatically, understanding how these things work. And we need a lot of time. But when it was done, testing it, new software release, adding patches, adding users, performing any kind of request was super simple, a matter of minutes versus a matter of hours. So our feedback loop for testing, for delivering new features was easy, super easy. Just run our pipeline and testing and everything was working. And it was really an enabler from the team, right? So the same happens nowadays with complex technical platforms. We acknowledge working test first might not be super easy because of the times involved in creating infrastructure, even virtual. But if you achieve that, if you focus on that, if you put your ingenuity on building that, for the whole lifetime of the platform, these 7 years, 8 years we have been discussing, you are going to be much more able to meet your customer requirements because you are going to be able to release it faster and in a safer way, right? So that's what we see. These practices apply in both worlds. In one of them, admittedly, might be more difficult. But Keith Morris, for instance, has these 3 rules about infrastructure and code that we use and we find super, super interesting, right? The fact of delivering all the infrastructure as code, testing it continuously and splitting it in small parts and can be tested again separately. And that's something we advise to all the infrastructure teams. If you follow these rules, normally your systems are more decoupled and you can have shorter pipelines and faster feedback loops.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think also trying to cut down time on processes that are manual and take a lot of time, but come in at a certain frequency, like it reminds me of ticket ops, right? In the end, because it's answering tickets, right? And this is boring. So if you can automate that, your team has the freedom to work on things that really matter, and not do some manual patches on based on tickets that come in or create new users, all these kind of things. And that makes a lot of sense.
I mean, mentioning tickets, I think, is a good, there's a good heuristic that says that self-service is most of the time, if not all of the time, a really important, both technical and non-technical feature of a platform. So I think it, on one hand, from a technical side, it holds you to a certain standard of automation and excellence because you have to figure out how this stuff works, not just, where the button is in the AWS console to add it manually. You kind of have to really get to grips with it and embody your knowledge in code that's hopefully tested and certainly deliverable. But also to get back to our earlier comments about both the product thinking and adoption, that if something is ticket ops, it's probably going to struggle to look like an attractive option compared to direct usage of public clouds, which are, after all, automatic, and you can do everything, with command line invocations. So if you're trying to convince people that your internal platform is going to solve their problems and deliver them benefits, that just going nuts with a credit card on one of the cloud providers, and then your process involves log me a Jira ticket and then I'll promise to get back to you in 3 days, it's probably not going to be a compelling experience for them.
Yeah, I absolutely not. And I love this saying of that you, as a platform team, you need to build golden paths for your teams. Like you need not golden cages. You need to build like paths that if the teams follow this path, then they can be assured that things work. And I think without tickets, so self-service, absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. That's one of the main goals you should have. Maybe looking at the time, maybe switching to the last of your 5 points that you mentioned, which is healthy teams. If you talk about healthy teams, which teams are you thinking about? The platform teams or the teams using the platform?
So I think we think about the platform team specifically, and I think this point might actually be the most, I didn't think it was going to be the case, but I think from people's reactions, sometimes this is the most heretical of our points. Other bits people nod along to. So I think in the application development world, over the past 10 years, there's been a widespread acceptance that the team is the unit of software delivery. And there's been all sorts of kind of, work from Google saying that psychological safety is one of the key aspects of a productive team. There's been books like Team Topologies that talk about how to manage the cognitive load of a team. There's lots of literature out there about what it means to be a tech lead, which might involve, creating a good space for a team as a whole. I hope I'm not going to offend my platform brothers and sisters out there, but I think that the culture of senior people being heroes who do things and carry a company on their back, it's much stronger and remains in the platform and infrastructure part of the industry than in the application development. So what this leads to, I think, is, on a human level, burnout for individuals who, they're the heroic people who saved the company so many times, and then, finally they just kind of can't stand the impact it has on their personal life yet again. But also, if they do quit or they do burn out or have to take a holiday, the knowledge management of how to sustain this platform is lost. So to get back to the pioneers, you have a bunch of pioneers. Maybe they're slightly individualistic people. They do all sorts of brilliant things. They stand up the platform. Maybe they do manage to give it operational and software engineering excellence. But if they don't form a cohesive set of teams, you're not going to move into that settler and town planner phase. What you're going to do is the people who've built your platform, who've managed to find some very good things to put on their resumes, are going to be recruited by other companies to build their platforms. And you're going to find enormous gaps in your institutional knowledge of the platform. And you've asked your company to commit to this platform, right? They've got to build things on it. They've got to, they've got to trust it, and you've got to live up to that trust. And if the teams working to provide the platform aren't sharing knowledge, aren't preserving psychological safety, aren't making room for junior or more junior people to learn the ropes and come up and replace other people who go on to other opportunities, you may find that you have a technically excellent platform, but the social ecosystem you need to keep it running can fall apart. And if you're one of those companies who's like, okay, that's fine, we'll just hire some more people. Well, good news for anyone listening who is working in the platform and infrastructure space, but for senior people in those areas, the salaries you need to attract these people is only going higher and higher. And it's not sustainable to have a platform that you can't keep a unified group of human beings around who'll keep it running. So that is actually one of the most common failure modes, not technical forever, but that the personnel who work on a platform are not creating healthy enough teams and not enough opportunities for junior people to come in and be effective within that context.
Definitely, I think that's having this. So having any team in which only senior people can be involved, it's probably an interesting red flag, right? That's how this team is going. Is it sustainable in any part of an organization, right? In a platform team, of course. Besides that, also they need to have the healthy ways of working, right? They need to understand this collective ownership of the platform, but also they need to understand how to manage their own workload, right? To constantly reduce the toil work, have metrics for that, understand that this is going a continuous effort, being able to discuss with their management about the cognitive load and negotiate with them how to reduce it. So being in this table and discuss that. And they need to have some slack as well. There's some slack time. I mean, as I think that was John Gold that says that loose systems work better, right? Super efficient systems are a danger to themselves and to others. Super efficient system has no room for change. And this team is going to change, so we need to have some slack. And these things, collective ownership, psychological safety, diversity, and understanding of the ways of working are super important in multiplier teams like platform teams.
Yeah, I can really see that. It would be super interesting to connect a discussion with you and Manuel Pais and the authors of Team Topologies and bring this all together. I think that would be, we should do this in 2022, because I think there's a lot to discuss there, especially about health, team health. I can clearly see that.
Well, I think that the cognitive load assessment that
Yes.
Manuel and Matthew produced, I think is a really good exercise. And, I've run this with teams who work in platform areas to work out whether something is manageable, because at least in my experience, there's plenty of organizations who at the application software level will say things like, we can tell this is too much for one team. We need to like split the monolith, or we need to create a new team to handle this. But maybe don't apply that same level of care about cognitive load to people working in platform, who maybe sometimes spread too thin to effectively, share knowledge. And maybe that then creates a knock-on effect where it creates a difficult environment that only super senior people can thrive in. It kind of has a knock-on effect because you don't create healthy teams, therefore you rely on really senior individuals, therefore you don't create the environment for healthy teams.
Yeah, and you have these heroes that save the company. I saw that in teams, in platform teams, absolutely.
Yeah.
And at some point they burn out. And you're absolutely right, Chris. This is absolutely.
Yeah,
So
no good for the human beings ever to burn out, but also no good for the value to your platform if the burnout happens in year 2 of the 7 that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe we reached the end of our 45 minutes that we planned for, and went through the 5 points. So I think we did quite well. We have the question in the chat, which is very fair, on providing good books and must reads, which we are happy to do in the follow-up email. I think that the Team Topologies book is definitely one that, if you haven't read it already, you should. Matthew and Manuel did a great job in writing down some of the underlying dynamics that you should follow. And they also talk about platform teams, not technically, but more from a conceptual point and from a team topology point of view. But maybe there's other stuff that the two of you want to share in terms of must reads.
I guess from a technical point of view, I guess Cristóbal already called this out, and I guess Keith is a colleague of ours, so there's a bias at play. I think Keith also might have been a past guest on this webinar series, but I think Keith Morris's Infrastructure as Code, it does a good job of making the case that there's no excuse for lowering your standards when working in infrastructure. Is what I think of it. So it talks a lot, like Cristóbal said, about doing testing, breaking things into small pieces, continuously delivering. But the message I kind of get is, if that small voice in my head says this is infrastructure, this is different, I don't need to do it properly. I then, go back to Infrastructure as Code, where, Keith kind of says, no, it might be a bit harder. Maybe the feedback loops are difficult. Maybe the tooling is a bit less ready, but it's no less important to maintain good technical standards of not just building, but iteration over time in the infrastructure world.
Yeah, we can also link the meetup we had with Keith a few weeks back, because I think that was an interesting discussion. Yeah, Cristóbal, from your point of view, any must reads?
I think that Infrastructure as Code is definitely must read. The same with Team Topologies. I would recommend as well, if we're interested in healthy teams, The 5 Dysfunction of a Team from Patrick Lencioni. It's a really good book on understanding the dynamics that come from trust and how they multiply across. Well, they generate better outcomes when they're there, and we are there when they are not there. They generate very visible problems, right? Something really interesting to read, in my opinion. Cool.
Okay, we'll make sure to include those. So not a lot of questions, which is fine. I think there was a relatively easy to follow line of thought. I like that. So I hope we gave everybody nice new input on thinking how to think about platform teams. Think long term, think product, think excellence, think health. I think those are great points. Thanks, Chris and Cristóbal, for taking the time today for this meetup. Thanks everybody for attending. If you have follow-up questions, as I said, I'll share a follow-up email tomorrow, and you can also reach out to Chris and Cristóbal with questions, I think. But enjoy the rest of your day for now, and thank you so much for joining us.
Cool. Thanks, Christoph. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. It's been nice. Thank you.
Bye.